All right. So, welcome back to Contrarians. We have another Dark Horse panel here for you today. We're going to be talking about PIL and the album. We've got a great group of people here today. Looks like Reid has made it, so that's great. And just wanted to thank you guys all for showing up. We appreciate it. Looking forward to hearing your opinions on this one. So for you folks at home, thanks for being here as well. And if you like the video, please give it a like. If you know someone who might be interested, feel free to share. And if you want to see more of the content, you can do a subscribe. There's also a Patreon. If you want to join in on the chats, any tier of the Patreon will get you access to it. There's also other stuff for the Patreon I'm supposed to say, but I forgot. So we'll just keep going. There's a Public if you want to get a t-shirt or something like that. And there's also Ko-fi if you want to do a one-time support for Martin. And with that all out of the way, I have a little bit of research on this album that I'll run through real quick. For warning, I did pull some of this from Wikipedia, so if something's wrong, I'm sure we'll be corrected by our panelists. So we're talking about PIL, Public Image LtD. They are an English post-punk band formed by singer John Lydon from the Sex Pistols, obviously. Guitarist Keith Levine, bassist Ja Wobble, drummer Jim Walker in 1978. The band's personnel has changed frequently over the years. Lydon has been the only sole constant member. Spoiler warning, I'm sure that's going to come up on this album. Album, also known as compact disc, cassette, or MP3, depending on the format, is the fifth album by PIL, released on the 27th of January, 1986. It's considered a departure from their previous releases. And I believe, if I've written this down right, Bill Laswell fired whoever was in the band previously or convinced John Lydon to do that, and then they brought in a bunch of session musicians, and some of those are some famous guys like Steve Vai and Ginger Baker. The resulting album gave PIL one of its highest charting songs, Rise. There's some quotes that I put in here from John Lydon and Bill Laswell, but I think instead of doing that, let's just dive right in and get to the reason you're here, which is to hear from our panelists. So in no particular order, we're going to just run through, panelists will give their rating for the album, and I'll keep track of that. And at the end, we'll do an average, and we'll see how it's going. If we're able to keep our reviews fairly concise, we can open it up at the end and have maybe a bit of an open discussion. Maybe we can see if we can start a little debate or heated argument. We'll see what happens. So with that all out of the way, I'm going to turn it over to Joe. Joe, why don't you let us know what you think about the album, as you're wearing the t-shirt,
sure.
And and you can also tell the folks a little bit about yourself and start to finish. So
so this is one of my top 10 favorite albums of all time. I absolutely love it. I wound up buying it because I found out somehow Steve Vai was on it, and I wasn't really a big PIL fan. I wasn't familiar with their work pre this album, cassette, compact disc. I bought this. It grew on me. I fell in love with it. It just builds up as you play it, and I still listen to it constantly. Steve Vai even says it's some of his finest work. There's nothing else. I mean, in 1986, there were some really good albums that came out, some great albums like Masters of Puppets and Peace Sells Who's Buying, Orgasmatron by Motorhead. Those are a few that come to mind, but PIL has stood the test of time, and album is just one of my favorites. I absolutely love it. It's just it's weird. It's musically great. Steve Vai is incredible on it. John Lydon's vocals sound amazing. The drums are powerful, and every song it ruminates in your head in a good way, and the best song is the last song in the last two songs, Home and Ease. So, the album, it just builds up and builds up and builds up, and you go to Home and then Ease, and it's like, I just want to listen to this again and again and again. So I give this a 10 out of 10.
Really?
Awesome. Wow. That's
Yeah, I absolutely love it. I mean, it wasn't really in my wheelhouse. I kind of, I'm thinking about back 85, 86, especially 87. I started getting, tired of some of the music that was coming out. I mentioned Metallica. It really hit me when Cliff died, and I thought that was a big downer. So this was something new out of left field for me. It's heavy, it's weird, and it's just what I needed at that time. And 10 out of 10 for sure.
all right. Awesome. Well, there we go. Starting off strong with the 10 out of 10, and we'll keep going, and we'll go right over to Andee. So, Andee, take it away. You can let the folks know a little bit about yourself and give us your review of this album.
All right. My name's Andee Blacksugar. I'm a musician. I live in Brooklyn, New York. I'm a huge Public Image Ltd fan, and this album was my introduction to the band. And I think that looking back on it now, this was really the perfect album to be a gateway for me at the time, because I was sort of like a metalhead teenager, and I was just starting to get interested in non-metal types of music when I heard this. And, The Cure was kind of leading the charge there, a little bit of Susie and the Banshees. I was getting a taste for post-punk and stuff like that. And, being a guitar player, it won't surprise anyone that I was originally kind of seduced by the presence of Steve Vai on this record. I was over at a friend's house. He was playing this album. I didn't know what it was, but I heard Steve Vai and immediately knew who it was. And I said, what is this? And he explained it to me how it was Johnny Rotten, but it was his band post-Sex Pistols. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, like my brain is kind of exploding. I'm trying to cotton these things. My idea of what punk was at the time was probably pretty reductive, like pogoing, gobbing, nihilists with victory mohawks. And here's this guy, that I'm listening to who's really intelligent and sarcastic and charismatic. And he's playing with Steve Vai, of all people. Now, over the years, the Steve Vai factor in this really has just become a footnote, because I've just come to love these songs. And it's funny, like what Joe mentioned about just mentioning that Orgasmatron came out the same year. That was also produced by Bill Laswell. I think Bill Laswell needs a documentary made about him. I find him fascinating. He's been involved in such a wide variety of projects, and he doesn't particularly seem to have a production style or a method, but he's very much a powerful influence over the proceedings. So anyhow, so my introduction to Pill was through this album. It's a great album to start with if you don't know anything about this band and you kind of come from a hard rock metal background, because this album rocks. It's pretty straightforward. The presence of these esoteric musicians like Ginger Baker and Billy Cobham and Bernie Worrell. I mean, I don't even hear these guys. Like when I listen to this record, I don't hear anything that points towards those personalities. It's so straightforwardly recorded and arranged. It's kind of surprising to me that Laswell even needed to enlist these kind of upper echelon artistes. Steve Vai is the only one that really, really puts his fingerprints all over this record, because he plays solos on pretty much every song. But, this being a gateway, I borrowed this disc from my friend, and I also borrowed the two albums that come after it. And I started to realize after I got into the earlier stuff that this album really is the beginning of the commercial period. Can you even see it? Well, you know what it looks like. Yeah. It's the beginning of the commercial period of this band, where the songs are more concise. There are hooks. It's not as difficult. It's not as experimental. But the soul of it is John Lydon and his delivery and his lyrics and his charisma. When you work backwards from this album, you get into the thornier era of the band where it's very kind of obtuse almost, and noisy and confrontational, and sometimes it's half baked. Sometimes it sounds lazy. Sometimes it's really visionary and really unlike anything else you've ever heard. But I find it a fascinating. It's sort of an art project, Pill. You have John Lydon with just this massive rotating cast of characters over the years, and he's the only core of it. And yet there's a bit of cohesion even across all the commercial records, the ones that were produced later on in the 80s, like by Stephen Hague, who's like Pet Shop Boys producer, and so on. So yeah, just some comments about some of the songs. A lot of them are really hypnotic and kind of haunting and repetitive, which is a pretty standard thing for Pill. The song Rise is, I would say, the warmest thing that John Lydon ever recorded. It has like a humanity to it and a pathos. He apparently wrote it about apartheid, and it's got kind of an inviting Celtic kind of feel to it. Other songs on the record are more caustic and confrontational. The opening track is kind of like a big middle finger to somebody who dissed John Lydon along the way. Farewell, fair weather friend. There's some interesting little orchestrations in here, like the glockenspiel in Fishing, with the glockenspiel, and there's some really cool, I think there's didgeridoo at the beginning of Ease, and some really cool dramatic, cinematic keyboard orchestration there. This is all Laswell, I believe that he is the one that gives this album its sonic cohesion. The drums all have this big, roomy, bright sound. Steve Vai, as I mentioned, plays these very Steve Vai solos, and it somehow works. There's a line in Bags that goes dun, 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 that Kurt Cobain ripped off in one of the songs on Bleach, and I can't remember which one, but it's sort of an interesting footnote. So yeah, this is sort of like right in the middle of the catalog. It's halfway between the experimental first half of the career and the more commercial second half. And I give it a 9 out of 10. I just think it's a great entry point, and it's an album that really holds up. It doesn't sound dated. It sounds fresh and really unlike anything else. So I'm giving it a 9.
Andee, you explained it perfectly. It's hypnotic, and its spell has never been broken with me. It puts me into this hypnotic state when I listen to it. And I listen to it about once a week. So perfect. Yeah. Perfect description.
Great t-shirt, by the way. Mine is from 1989, I believe. This is from the 9 tour. Anyway, that's my piece.
Well, that's awesome. We're starting off really strong. We got a 10 out of 10 and a 9 out of 10 already. So I'm interested to hear what the rest of the panel has to say. Hopefully someone doesn't like this album. We could get a little bit of a discussion going here. So Grant and Reid, I'm counting on you. Grant, you're up next. Why don't you tell the people?
Yeah, I was going to say, is this supposed to be a Dark Horse record? Because this is not a Dark Horse album. But I'm willing to talk about it.
Go for it.
First of all, like everyone's saying, there's just a killer lineup of musicians. I mean, I agree. This is probably it's probably not Steve Vai's best work, but I think he fits in here just perfectly. He's the perfect guitar player for this record. But I kind of look at this record and I keep thinking it's like a Bizarro World Peter Gabriel album. It's like a post-punk Peter Gabriel album for some reason. I don't know why it reminds me of Peter Gabriel, but most of the PIL albums are just so out there. And like Andee was saying, this is kind of like the start of the more commercial period. I mean, this is still out there to some degree, but not like what came before, like Flowers of Romance and all that. But the tracks, my first impression was, just because I haven't heard this record in a long time, and then since I'm trying to dissect it somewhat, when I heard FFF, the first thing I thought was, my gosh, that's punchy. And it sounds like a live feel for an album that has been basically pieced together. Musicians coming in, laying their tracks down. Steve Vai was there 2 days and he did all of his guitar parts. It so much has a live feel. I don't know if you guys noticed that too, but it sounds really live. And Tony Williams on the first track, holy mackerel. I thought it was Tony Thompson playing drums. It sounded like something off the Power Station album. Freaking thought Bernard Edwards was producing this. But it's big, it's lively. I like the way it sounds. So far, it doesn't sound dated, but there's some stuff on here that kind of dates it. Rise went to number 11 in the UK. It's had 21,446,923 plays on Spotify. It is way beyond any other PIL album on Spotify. I mean, that certainly isn't a Dark Horse album song, I'll give you that. But I love the way the sequence goes from the first track to Rise. I think that's awesome. And I think Rise is a classic track. Here on alternative radio in Central Ohio, they still play this song regularly. I think this is a good use of Fairlight. It's not dated. I think Bill Laswell his bass on here is absolutely killer. Steve Vai is Steve Vai. I mean, I love the energy of this track. It's just, the lyrical content, anger is energy. I love that. Fishing. And I went back and made another note. And I've said this before. I said, but for a record that's pieced together, it's amazing how cohesive it sounds. I just love it. But this track sounds a bit dated because we have a Yamaha DX7 on it. It could have went into Chicago territory, but it didn't. It did date it a bit, but overall it's a good track. And did I mention Steve Vai? This song is hypnotic. It is excellent. Round, you got Ginger Baker playing drums. And this song reminds me like, let's say Peter Gabriel, Security, and Flowers of Romance had offspring together. That would be this track. It sounds like the perfect blend of Peter Gabriel and Flowers of Romance. And also what's great about this song, Steve Vai, another brilliant performance, and Jonas Hellborg, which is a hell of a bass player, hell of a jazz bass player is playing on here. It's just phenomenal. The musicianship is absolutely wonderful. Bags, I kept thinking Peter Gabriel on this. I know we've got Johnny Lydon singing, but it still reminded me of Peter Gabriel. And when Ginger Baker hit the drums, I was almost thinking, hitting the cymbals, I was thinking, Ginger, maybe if you play this without the cymbals, it'd be more impactful. Like, which Peter Gabriel album was it that's got Games Without Frontiers, has no cymbals on it? But he nailed that whole drum sound. Got more Fairlight on this. It almost dates it, but I'll give it a pass. It's kind of an odd track, but I like it. I don't have any problems with it. Holmes got Tony Williams back on the drums. Love the middle 8 on this track. It's absolutely killer. I would almost have to say that Home might be my favorite track on this record. I like the overall sound of it, and it's live sounding. I wish I'm trying to find stuff to pick on this record about. So there's some DX7, which dates it, which is bad. But, when this came out, that's what everybody was using. It fit right in. No one knew that it was going to sound dated. But I can't really, I've been trying to nitpick, but I can't really find any faults. Ease, Fairlight City, baby. I don't see this as a dark horse album at all. I think this is a great closer to the album. Everybody sounds great. Johnny Lighting sounds great. I give this album a 4 out of 5, so probably an 8 out of 10. I love it. But my favorite, I love Flowers of Romance. So, this is a little commercial for me, but I'll go with it.
All right. Awesome. Well, coming out strong there. And we're still, the scores are very high.
I'm sure Reid will come up with, he'll probably slam it.
All right, Reid. Well, we're putting you on the spot here. Why don't you give us your review, and we'll see how it goes.
No, all my hot takes come on those early morning videos that we record. So when I'm awake, it's a different thing. And before I start, I just want to say, Joe, my friend, you constantly surprise me. There are depths to that man that just never expect. So good on you, sir. All right. So I'm coming into this particular chat with virgin ears. Until literally last year, I didn't even know that post-punk was a thing. I thought it was just literally just a description of a time period, right? It's after punk, it's post-punk, not a musical genre. And then I spent a couple of months going, well, wait a minute, what's the difference between post-punk and new wave? And I think it was Martin on some chat someplace mentioned this book, Rip It Up and Start Again. That's PIL on the cover, which is all about post-punk. And I gave this thing a read. It is fascinating, but with very, very few exceptions, there is not a single description in this book that made me want to listen to any of this music. When people just talk about post-punk, it sounds like complete artsy, pretentious crap. People that wanted to throw away rockisms, right? That was part of the, no, it's okay. This isn't my hot take. I'm just saying they wanted to not be rock musicians. They literally didn't know how to play their instruments. They were recording albums for £100 in England, which even in the 70s, that was pocket change, man. So these albums sounded terrible. They were by people who intentionally wanted to make weird music. And to me, it reminds me a lot of, I have a friend who was really into those super bitter IPAs, right? The super hoppy beers. And it's a matter of pride that he can drink this beer that's nearly undrinkable. And that's for the sociologically inclined of you. That's the in-group narrative for people that love post-punk. Oh, you don't get it, man. Well, okay, fine. I don't want to get it. But that having been said, because of some other chats we've had here on the Contrarians, I did dip my toe into the post-punk waters. I went back and got into Joy Division and surprisingly liked Joy Division. I did a video here or someplace about Joy Division's first album and enjoyed it. And I really got into The Cure, which is heavily post-punk influenced, but I had never heard Public Image Limited. So now I've heard the Sex Pistols, but I had no idea what this album was going to sound like. And then it was up as a Dark Horse album, and that made me go, okay, so presumably this is atypical for PIL's output. So now I don't know what it's going to sound like, and it's an atypical album anyway. All of which is to say, I was not surprising, or I was not expecting what I got. And when that first song started playing, what is it, FFF? Mm-hmm. I was like, what the hell? This is freaking fantastic. I love this album. And coming in absolutely cold. And I do not like to read about music before I listen to music. I don't want people's impressions of it coloring my perception. So I listened to it completely cold. And interesting that Andee, you said you could tell it was Steve Vai immediately. I thought it was Adrian Belew because it's so noisy and weird. But as I'm listening to it and thinking, what in the world am I listening to? It's catchy, it's upbeat, It's aggressive. It's got these really weird solos. It honestly, I would relate it to Frank Zappa. It reminds me of kind of Zappa-esque sort of music. It sounds wonderful. The production on it is great. By the way, I don't have a PIL t-shirt, so I have the Motorhead t-shirt rocking here, and I'm going to say that that's because I knew that the producer had produced a Motorhead album. That's a lie. It's a coincidence. But all of the instruments sound great. The drum sounds great. This album does not sound like 1986. Am I right about that? It came out in 1986.
Yeah.
It sounds like somebody spent a lot of money on it. The drums sound great. The synthesizers are not nearly as prominent as I was expecting. What I came to expect from post-punk is very prominent bass, very tinny drums, and enough reverb on the vocals to sound like it was recorded in a cave. And none of that is present on this album. In fact, the production of it, if anything, reminded me a little bit of like David Bowie's output in the 80s. It's very warm. In fact, in some points, considering the lyrical content, I think it's bizarrely good sounding. And it's John Lydon's vocals, I guess, that really make it Public Image. I mean, I'm going to guess because I've never heard any other Public Image Limited at this point. But I did notice repetition is a thing on this album. John Lydon's, he uses one vocal style for the entire album constantly, no matter what he's singing about. And there were a couple of these songs that I was listening to and going, I'm kind of afraid to look up the lyrics on this, but I've got to. And then I went and looked up the lyrics. And I'm like, okay, that's pretty unpleasant. So that's about what I expected. Some of them like Rise, anger is an energy. The repetition of that, this mantra that forms, creates an energy. I could just feel that in concert. That would be overpowering. But then you get into something like Bags, and if I'm not mistaken, this is about somebody being murdered in the Arizona desert. That's kind of the impression I got from it. Anyway, it's a pretty gruesome lyric. But after a while, his vocal style is a little overpowering. It doesn't feel like it should match the music, but somehow it does. And then easily for me, the runaway track is Ease is the last track, right? And Ease has a little more space to it. It's not quite as continual. It's got, a little more light and shade into it. And then when Steve Vai starts ripping, you can really go, oh, okay, yeah, that's clearly Steve Vai. This isn't, 86, he'd only been out of Zappa's band for 3 years. So I think that's really where he still had that ability to just walk into the studio, listen to a backing track, and lay down something completely weird that nonetheless fit. That was the Zappa boot camp in action. And Adrian Belew played for Zappa, right? So there's why I thought it was Adrian Belew on there. So coming from literally not knowing what to expect, I was blown away by this album. I said my only knock on it is that I wish John Lydon was a little bit more varied of a vocalist. I wish he would use a little bit more dynamics. He would use a little bit different presentation of the material. But what's there is fantastic. And I still have no desire to listen to the non-commercial PIL, but if this is where the commercial PIL starts, I may check out the subsequent albums. So I'm giving it a 9.
Nice. You bring up the lyrics. The one thing that always stuck out to me is on Ease when he says dysentery. But he says dysentery, and it's such a nasty disease. That's the first thing I think of. There's some heavy lyrical content on this album, but it all fits together. Also, Andee, you mentioned, you were a young metalhead. I was full in heavy metal. I buy this album, compact disc, cassette, whatever you want to call it, t-shirt. And I was kind of like listening to it on the sly because all my other cohorts and friends were masters of puppets or peace cells. But I was finding in these like peace cells that after the first couple songs, it got average. This album would just keep on growing on me. And I'd listen to it. And I remember how much I loved the Sex Pistols. And then, Steve Vai would go on to play with David Lee Roth. But yeah, I can't say enough about the album. I gave it a 10 out of 10, obviously, but yeah.
Awesome.
There are some really interesting little lyrical artifacts. My other favorite one was, I think it's at the end of Fish. I'm checking off to the right. I've got my notes here on a computer, where he says, people who need people are the stupidest people. I was like, oh, well, that's okay. Sure. Not a happy man, Mr. Lydon, apparently.
Smart guy, though. Well, all right. Our average score is a 9. So the unanimous decision of the panel is this is not a Dark Horse album. So there you go. We got plenty of time left, so we can sort of open up for a discussion. Is there any sort of burning topics anyone really wants to chat about this album? Yeah, go. I
wanted to say something about the Dark Horse nature of it, because you would think that based on everything we just said, like this is a no-brainer. It's a great album. But when I started getting into this band and reading reviews of the whole catalog, I found that critically, Public Image peaked at the second album and just went steadily, precipitously downhill after that. The more commercial they got, the more they strayed from this purity. But I think that what's cool about stuff like the Contrarians is that now people get to be heard. Like fans get to help shape the narrative about a band or an album, and critics don't control the conversation anymore. But I just found, I would sort of leaf through these books of album reviews in a bookstore, and I'd always look uphill and see what they said about the catalog. And they always just pretty much trash everything after Flowers of Romance. And maybe they'll grudgingly give points to one song off of this album, Rise, which is just maybe the greatest song of the whole catalog. But yeah, I think that's why, I think it's still valid to think of this as a Dark Horse album, because it's so, it has nothing to do with the original vision of the band. The original lineup is completely gone. Even in recent years, when Lydon brought the band back in, 2011 or so, he's had a stable lineup since then. Has put out 2 really strong albums. But I think that what rubs people the wrong way about this album is that it's just like a bunch of studio ringers, and, it's just a little too well put together and recorded. And, we didn't want John Lydon to become this. Is sort of the feeling of people who were there, who followed him from the Sex Pistols onward. I think he was held up as like a genius when they put out the Metal Box record, because it was such a forward-thinking album that was so far away from Sex Pistols that it was sort of like, wow, this guy is just creating his own world to live in, and he wants nothing to do with his past. And, in a way, this almost connects him back to his past, because it just rocks. It's like a rock album. And the Peter Gabriel comment is, I think there's something to that as well, because it does have elements of world music kind of woven, and it has some exotic flavors kind of peppered in there. And Yeah, that's my additional comment.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's awesome.
Anytime you have a truly cult anything, movie, album, book, whatever it is, again, the point of pride for the cult is that they get it and you don't. So that separates the ends from the outs right there. Yes. And there is nothing the cult hates more than having their beloved person that's, no one else can understand do something that suddenly everybody can understand. That's the ultimate sellout, right? Is, how dare you appeal to everybody? You're my figure. So I completely get that.
Yeah.
Now, would you also recommend the subsequent albums after album?
I personally love the 2 albums that come after this. So the next album is called Happy. And John McGeoch joins the band on guitar, who's one of the greatest guitar players of all time. He had previously played with Susie and the Banshees and Magazine. So it's not Steve Vai type guitar playing. It's really inventive post-punk guitar playing with lots of really unique arpeggios and textures. And he stays with the band through 3 albums. So you've got Happy, and then 9 comes after Happy, and that one's really slickly produced, but I love both of those albums. The 3rd in the series is called That What Is Not, and I never liked that album. I still can't particularly find anything to like about it. And then they disbanded. So I didn't get into this band until after they disbanded. And I've only seen them live now since they've reunited. And I do recommend the 2 millennial albums they put out. This is Pill and What the World Needs Now. He's got some of his old 80s bandmates in his current lineup, including Lou Edmonds, who was a member of The Damned for a little bit. So it's pretty cool that he's back making music. And I also really love the first 2-3 albums as well. But I would never say that they're as cohesive as this. The Metal Box record, to me, has some genius on it, and it has some lazy kind of like unfinished ideas. I find things to love about most of the albums, but I can't really rate any of them a 10. So that's my take.
I know there's a story. I can't remember if this story is in this book, but if you're literate, check this thing out, rip it up and start again. It's an amazing book, but it might have been in a documentary or something I watched, but they talk about a Pill concert in New York City where their entire idea was they stood behind the screen in a theater. And I don't know whether they were planning on doing back projections or whatever, but that didn't work. So people in the audience were just staring at a blank screen while Pill was kind of playing in the background, and it caused a riot. And I thought, yeah, there's an immortality moment for you right there.
Yeah. Kind of curious. Andy, you mentioned that sort of, the critically they peak early on and then it's sort of a slow decline. And Grant, you mentioned that you prefer the earlier stuff and that this album's sort of right on the line for being too commercial. So in that sense, because you were the one who was pointing out that, it's sort of too good to be a dark horse, do you get that dark horse sort of connotation in that sense, coming from that perspective, that it's right on the line of what's acceptable? And I guess tying in, what Reid was talking about, how, if there's sort of an in click of that less commercial stuff, how do you feel about that? Does that perspective match with how you feel? Is this the last of the good records, or I'm sort of rambling here, but hopefully you got something.
Right. I don't think this is the last of the good records. It's just there's so much. The band varies so much. I probably would say I like Flowers of the Romance because that really was my introduction to it when I was like a teenager, and I just thought it was incredible. And it was unlike anything else I'd ever heard on the planet. So after all these years, it has a fondness for me. But it's very uncommercial. I mean, it's almost avant-garde.
For sure.
It would drive Reid crazy. Reid would want to jump off a building. But album, though, is experimental enough that I think it probably bridges that gap for me. Like I said, it bridges that world music, that Peter Gabriel vibe, but then it still has elements of Flowers of Romance or maybe even earlier stuff for me. So it's kind of like a nice middle ground. I think so. I mean, yeah, they get a little bit more commercial as they go. I love the record, though. I mean, I like Flowers of Romance better. Just maybe it's nostalgia, like I said. I don't know.
Okay, that's interesting.
I don't know. I think it's a great record, and if someone was looking to get into this band, I would say that this would be a good starting point. I would not, not recommend it. I would probably give them this as opposed to Flowers of Romance, or maybe, Metal Box. But man, those first three albums, I mean, you look at the reviews for those, all 5-star records, but they're not an easy those aren't easy albums to listen to either. This is a lot more easy. This album's a lot easier to digest, but it's still experimental.
So do you think that maybe since we're talking about such an experimental, that makes it the fact that it's easy, maybe that's where that Dark Horse suggestion's coming from? I don't know. And not to jump around.
I just can't see it as being a Dark Horse record.
It's too good for it, in your opinion.
It's too good. Even though I'm looking at the reviews, and the reviews are very mixed on it. All Music Guide, which it's All Music Guide, you have to take it with a grain of salt because normally they like everything. They only give it a 2.5-star review.
So, Joe, sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree with Andy. I would feel it's a Dark Horse album because that fan base, the original fan base of PIL, I could see them not liking this, and me jumping into this album. I mean, they just hit a sweet spot here. And you talk about the releases afterwards. I liked them, but this is a masterpiece to me. So those other albums I thought were pretty good, but nothing stands up to this. But as far as being a Dark Horse, yeah, I think there's certain albums out there. Now this didn't sell on these levels, but I just recently had a conversation about the Black Album by Metallica. That sold its diamonds, but you can consider it a Dark Horse album, as far as Andy's criteria, because it pissed off a lot of the original Metallica fans. So I think it might fall in the wheelhouse there, that it has a commercialism to it. But I don't know. For me, it's just perfection. And like I said, I still listen to it constantly.
Interesting. All right. So I think despite the fact that everyone loves the album here, we do, it's kind of cool that we've got everyone sort of pulling for a different reason and appreciating a different aspect. And Reid, I think it's great that you're so honest about, saying, I just started off and this is the only one I've heard, because that gives us another unique perspective where we can say,
I want to have
different samples.
Did Andy bring up the Kurt Cobain ripping off the riff?
Yeah.
He did that so many times. We need to have an episode on that, because he ripped off 80s by Killing Joke. He ripped off Countess Bathory by Venom. I mean, I think 90% of their catalog is just blatant ripoffs of other songs that he listened to. But that was a great point. But just for the future, I'll put it up there on the Patreon. We can vote.
Yeah, do it. That'd be a fun one.
Yeah.
Influences. Those were heavy influences, Joe.
Right.
All right. Well, we still we haven't even used up a full hour, so I'm gonna say we can go around one more time, and you can say anything you want about the album, anything you want to talk to the people about at home. If you got a fun, music fact you want to share, whatever it is, and we can call it after that. But the Contrarians panel has come to a conclusion of a score of 9. Some big love for Steve Vai, and the word of the day was hypnotic. So this is a hypnotic album that is a 9 out of 10. So go check it out. And we'll go around one more time. Just anything you want to say at all, even if it's completely unrelated, something just got to get off your chest. Go for it. So we'll go reverse order. Reid, why don't you say your final message for the folks at home?
Does anyone know if he toured this album? I don't know if Pill was really a touring band, but I was trying to imagine how you would take something that was done by some of the world's best studio musicians. I mean, when I looked up the entry on Wikipedia, and I was like, wait, Tony Williams? Like Tony Williams' lifetime? Tony Williams played drums on this? What the hell?
Thank you for saying that. I think I said Billy Cobham earlier. Did I?
Yeah, you did, but I knew what you meant.
Okay, sorry. Just quick correction.
Yeah, I mean, just crazy stuff. And Ginger Baker, who was even in the 80s, was a notorious figure, Mr. Irascible Ginger Baker. Yeah, so I don't know how he would have recreated this. I will say, while I am an enormous fan of Steve Vai's creativity, it's really more of a conceptual thing. I don't listen to Steve Vai. I don't care for a lot of Steve Vai's music. I can appreciate his technique. But this album instantly catapulted into my favorite Steve Vai recording ever. And I think it's because there is so much Blue influence in it. And I'm going to continue fighting for that perspective because it's mine. It's just so weird and outside, and I dig that. But again, inside the commercial songs. So you get that dichotomy. People, if you haven't listened to this album, go get it, man. It's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well worth getting.
Well, here, Grant, why don't you tell people your final message? Let them know where they can find Grant's Rock Warehouse.
Oh, Grant's Rock Warehouse. Yeah, we've been recording a lot of stuff. In fact, today, Todd Evans and I went live for, I don't know, what is this, episode 4 or 5 in our Matthew Sweet series, where we looked at 100% Fun and Blue Sky on Mars. That was fun. We just zipped through that one. That was good. I don't know when this episode's going to come up, but there is an episode of The Contrarians on the Doors with Marco, Martin, me, and Todd that is like a Contrarians episode on steroids. And I don't know when it's coming out, but I wish it would come out because I keep promoting the hell out of it and it never comes out. But we also did a bootleg show a Kiss bootleg show on my channel with Marco, where he went through all of his Kiss bootlegs. And Brett Peters was on there, and that was a blast. Todd and I did a They Might Be Giants episode. Did a Kiss on the soundboard episode. On Ryan's channel, Ryan's Vinyl Destination, we did a Scorpion show, which was great. There's all kinds of stuff going on. My whole calendar's like jam-packed. But there's content going up like almost every day. Reid, what do we have? Are we doing a Cure album, 4-album show sometime?
Later in the month, yeah.
Later in the month. Yeah, Reid and I have a show on The Cure, which I'm really looking forward to. A plethora of things coming up.
Awesome. Well, let's get some Contrarians. Let's head over to Grant Rock's Warehouse on YouTube. Give him a subscribe. Give him a watch.
I need more subscribers.
Well, there you go. You guys heard it. Head over there. Andee, why don't you give the folks at home maybe your final thought on the album? Anything you want to say at all? Go for it.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to answer Reid's question about did they tour for this album, and they did. I'm actually watching a video right now of the lineup that he put together that ended up being his band for the next 2 or 3 albums. So he's got Lou Edmonds on guitar and John McKeough on guitar. Neither one of these guys goes anywhere near the Steve Vai solos. It's just they're not that kind of player.
All right.
So but they're great players in their own right, and they are more kind of coming from a post-punk type of aesthetic, I would say. I don't think anyone has attempted, any lineup of Pill, any guitar player has ever attempted to play the Steve Vai solos, which is fine. And I've seen them a couple of times in recent years. Yeah, I just think this is a fascinating band. I wanted to say one other thing that I thought was like, when I first discovered Pill, I was also getting turned on to another band from the 80s that was started by a class of 77 punk rocker, Big Audio Dynamite. Mm-hmm. And I would love to do a conversation, if there's enough people, I would love to do a conversation about that band. That's Mick Jones from The Clash, another really forward-thinking band that sounded nothing like his old band. And I thought it was really cool that, you know, Public Image Limited, it's like an acronym. It spells out pill. Big Audio Dynamite spells out bad. And they were just both these really fearless, forward-thinking initiatives by these punk rock guys who just went in a completely different direction. So yeah, I'd love to talk about Big Audio Dynamite at some point. That's it for me. Andee Blacksugar. I'll see you soon.
Awesome. Well, maybe Grant nodded there. Maybe we can put together that panel and see if we. I kicked out my microphone cord. Maybe
yeah,
we can make that happen.
I wouldn't know why not. I'm sure there'd be a lot of people who'd be interested. Well, maybe, I don't know. Throw it out there.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. All right, Joe, final message for the folks at home, album related or not?
Album related, this album broadened my horizons. It got me out of my rut, and it came at the perfect time. And it just, I can't say enough. Obviously, I give 10 out of 10. As far as appearances, I've been on Rock Daydream Nation with Peter Kerr. Did an episode last week, doing another episode tomorrow. I'm dipping my toes into the YouTube world, and I started Average Joe's. We're talking about anything I'm interested in. So our first one, we talk baseball, boxing, mostly baseball, some boxing, some golf. But my second episode that just went up today, I'm talking to John Corabi, formerly of Motley Crue, Rat,
wow,
Dead Daisies, and we're talking about his stint as a truck driver, because he has this amazing book out called Horseshoes and Hand Grenades, and there's a brief part in there where he mentions that he fell on some financial hard times and he got a CDL license. So I emailed his management and he emailed me immediately. So we talk about his stint. We talk about some of his rock history too. We talk about how he worked as a truck driver, and it's just fascinating. So the Average Joe podcast or YouTube channel.
Awesome. Well, glad to hear you're dipping your toes in there. I'm sure it's going to be great. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. Big thank you to all our panelists. We really appreciate you guys coming out here and sharing your thoughts. The album has been given an average rating of 9 by the panel. That's rare. There's usually at least one person who hates whatever album is on there. So it's rare to see this this unanimous of a thing. So what's the word called? Rating. So I think we should all take that into consideration. This must be a great album. So again, if you like, please give a like. If you want to share, please give it a share. If you want to subscribe, feel free to do that. Patreon, TeePublic, all that good stuff. Most important thing is just thanks for being here. Give us your thoughts on this album in the comments, or, maybe suggestions for a new episode. Who knows? But yeah, appreciate everyone being here, panelists and viewers alike, and everyone go and have a great rest of your day, rest of your night. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Good night.
All right, guys.
Thank you.
Night, guys.
Great to see everyone.